The N64 lost very hard to the PlayStation and is now one of Nintendo's biggest competitors. And I know that Sony was competing with Nintendo during multiple other console generations, but I feel this fight was the most iconic and definitely the most interesting. So let's start off by looking at Nintendo's first ever 3D offering, the Nintendo 64. Yeah, I haven't complained about the N64 controller yet on this channel, so I think it's about time I finally give it the treatment it deserves. It seems... Is there anything else I need to say? I mean, come on, you can't even reach all the buttons on the controller at once. So I'm pretty sure it doesn't even fit the definition of a controller. It just isn't ergonomic in the slightest, and I feel like its crappy controls kind of held it back a little. Nothing astronomical. It's not like getting a controller that doesn't feel like strangling a three-limbed monkey would help it beat the PlayStation. Wait, how much did the N64 lose by? Oh. Hey, at least it doubled the sales of the Wii U. That's not something to brag about. Alright, now that I'm at my quota for hating the N64 controller, let's talk about the games. People often talk about how the games were great and that it had some real classics, which I think is true, but there is some real shovelware on this console. The only reason people don't talk about that, though, is because it keeps getting overshadowed by games like GoldenEye, or the Legend of Zelda games. Yeah, how dare people not notice the crap in this system? It really does suck that there aren't really hidden gems onto this console. Also, it doesn't help that the N64 had a notoriously small library. Basically, what I'm saying is that the games that were really good were really good, but games that are bad are really quite bad. So let's go back to the 90s when Nintendo basically created their biggest competitor. The Nintendo PlayStation might sound like something from an alternate universe, but it was in the making for a while. Nintendo partnered with Sony to make the new console, but Nintendo realized that they would not make a whole lot of money on the project and bailed. So Sony decided that they would take their experience that they gained from Nintendo and make their own console, which was of course the PlayStation. Good job, Nintendo. Now you have a huge competitor that you will lose to multiple times each generation. This whole failed partnership really hit Nintendo harder than they could have imagined, because now Sony has a much more powerful console that uses a much more, at the time, advanced format. The compact disc could hold a lot more information, and I would argue that might be one of the reasons Nintendo failed this generation. Because of the use of CDs in the PlayStation, many developers that once exclusively made games for Nintendo now are making games for the new console, such as Mega Man series with the release of Mega Man Legends. Also, the PlayStation brought a new, better offering to the hardcore audience that wasn't really captured by Diddy Kong Racing. They weren't? I would say that Sony also did a really good job of its time. I'm not saying that the console itself was necessarily ahead of its time, although it kind of was. I'm saying that the games you could get were much more different than anything else, really. Like the N64 had games like that, but the PlayStation had all of those grittier games that neither Sega nor Nintendo had. So even though I personally prefer the N64, I can really see why many gamers would flock to the PlayStation. It had a more advanced format, games you couldn't really get anywhere else at the time, and Nintendo never really puts out many gritty mature games at all these days, and I think that could be due to the fact that Sony has that market cornered. Like over here on the PS3 you got Call of Duty and other harsh war games, but over on the Wii you're stuck with Mario Sports Mix. Speaking of games, let's look at exclusives. I think Sony had some real good games. Things like Crash Bandicoot. Also, just look at the launch titles. The N64 launched with 2 games. Now, I understand that the 2 launched for the N64 were amazing titles, but the PlayStation launched with 13 titles, and most being darn good games like Ridge Racer and Rayman. Although I don't think anything on this list is nearly as good as either games launched with the N64, the sheer quantity of good games comes pretty close. I would say that when it comes to launches, they're about equal, but that's subjective and I can't say for sure. So I think that this might have been the most important console generation so far. It introduced true 3D gaming, it was the creation of the PlayStation brand, and it shaped what Nintendo is about these days. But it still really hurt Nintendo that generation and the next generation. To be honest, I'm not so sure they would be here today if it weren't for the fact that they had a big success this generation with the Nintendo Switch. I mean, just look at Sega. They had a couple of slip-ups and now they have been reduced to no more than a third-party developer. I think it's safe to say that the N64 for Nintendo was a learning experience that in the long run may have helped, because now they know to make educated business decisions instead of just drooling every generation. But hey, at least Nintendo's latest console doesn't look like a freaking Wi-Fi router.